Dr. Tom Coburn, former U.S. Senator from Oklahoma, author of the new book. It's a great book. You've got to get this. In fact, most of you guys probably would have helped him write this. D.C. Monopoly, using Article 5 to restore freedom and stop runaway government. Senator Coburn in the studio. Nice to have you here.
Charles, great to be with you, man.
You know, coming into the year, I kept reading these little things, and I was seeing on Twitter about a convention of states and Article 5, and I had to drill down and drill down. I didn't understand exactly what was going on. I know that there's been a major fight, particularly during President Obama's term, between states' rights and the federal government. Of course, he preferred a gargantuan federal government with very little states' rights. And I think to a degree you want to not only reverse that, but you want to get back to the real intent of the Founding Fathers.
Well, that's right. And if your listeners are frustrated as I am with the federal government and frustrated with decisions being made by unelected bureaucrats, and frustrated that your state can't do what's in its own best interest because an unelected bureaucrat has said you have to spend your money this way, then the way to solve that is through a convention of states, Article 5 Amendments Convention. You can learn about that at conventionofstates.com, but you can actually learn more about it by reading this book and understanding that there is something you as a U.S. citizen can do to fix Washington. It's a solution as big as the problem that we have.
A lot of people out there, I remember when the Tea Party movement started, and I was there at the very beginning. I went to at least 20 events over a 3-year period. I spoke at 12 around the country at different places, and the one thing that always struck me was the grandmother who said that she didn't know or think she was making a difference standing on a patch of grass somewhere near City Hall, but she was so motivated and so concerned about her grandchildren that she had to make a stand. Is that what you're saying? Are you telling people that they can't actually fight City Hall, in this particular case, big business, globalists, politicians? They can fight all of these people and make a difference?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our founders, if you understand what happened at the original Constitutional Convention, is our founders put in first that the only way the Constitution could be changed was through an amendments convention. And then they said, well, maybe the Congress ought to be able to offer amendments as well. And when it came back to the final writing, the individual state option for that was left out. And George Mason stood up and said, grievous error. There has not ever been in history a government that has voluntarily ceded its power back to its people. So Article 5 is so important for us because you can see now demonstrated with Republicans in control of the White House, Republicans in control of the Senate, Republicans in control of the House, that in fact it's not going to work. And the only way we're going to make it work is to force Congress to do what it was supposed to do, live within its means, using general accepted accounting principles, limit the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government so that they're not telling us what to do and they're not taking our freedom away every day, and limit the terms of both appointed and elected members of Congress. And if we do that, we'll get our country back. You know, a third of America's never seen America at its greatest. They've seen us in a down.
How do we spearhead that? Because you just laid out the fact that the GOP controls the White House, the Senate, and the House, and they were propelled there by the American people to do a few specific things. One was to repeal Obamacare. It's not going to be repealed. No matter what the final iteration of it is, it won't be repealed. It won't be the will of the people. And that was a clear mandate. So if they can't take clear mandates from the people that send them to D.C. in the first place, how can they ever unwind this thing, which seems like a bigger task?
Well, let's get down to the reason why they can't. Because there are certain members of the Republican Party who want to get reelected more than they want to get rid of Obamacare. And that's the simple truth. And so they're going to vote for their own political career rather than what's in the best interest of the country. And that's the conflict of interest that we see going on every day in Washington. And that's in the Congress. But there's another conflict of interest with this massive fourth branch of government called the bureaucracy. And that conflict of interest is never do what's best when you can do what's safe for the bureaucracy. So if we want to fix this, as Americans, What we have to do is let our state legislators know that we want Article 5 application made so that we can actually send commissioners to Washington to make recommendations to rebalance and restore the Constitution. Not a new Constitution, not anything dangerous at all, but rebalance, for example, the Commerce Clause. Do you realize that in most of the states, 60% of the money they collect from their own state taxpayers is controlled by a bureaucracy in Washington? How you spend it, what you can do with it, what you can't.
I've always found out to be nuts that the money is generated in a state, it's sent to D.C., and then they have to beg for it to get it back.
And it comes back with all these rules on it.
Exactly,
and
stipulations.
The decisions were never made by their elected officials. They're made by a bureaucrat. So if we want to do that, what we have to do is reestablish what the Commerce Clause meant, because that's the power that gives all these federal agencies the power over states.
Who gets to interpret that ultimately? Is that up to the Supreme Court to ultimately decide the interpretation of that?
Well, they did in 1931. That's why the federal government has grown so massively. It's a behemoth. Nobody can control the federal government. And no member of Congress, or rare members of Congress, are actually working on the real problems that are in front of us, which is $144 trillion worth of unfunded liabilities.
Senator Coburn, what is it about Washington, D.C., that changes people? Because I think most people go there with an honest intent to do the right thing, and it doesn't take long before the mission becomes to stay there by any means necessary.
Power is seductive. And with power, you get poor judgment. You get judgment that's challenged because you're influenced by the power that you hold. And so therefore, your judgment is impaired, and you make decisions that are about you instead about us as citizens. And so the charge to members of Congress is, you know, it's really okay to lose an election if you actually voted to do the right thing for America. And the paradox is, in my political career I proved it, is you don't have to please people. What you have to do is get them to trust you that you're going to do what's best in the long term for the country. And we don't see that. We see short-term political expediency coming out of both parties every day. You will look for the press releases that are coming from all the members of the Senate and the Congress. They're all about what they did for you.
Right.
Except the problem is they didn't fix the real problem.
Well, then, can we say to a degree the problem is the American voter? That are we demanding that our legislators bring back a bridge to nowhere? Or is it okay for them to give us a shot? Is it okay for them to stand up and say, "Hey, I'm not going to bring your bridge to nowhere, and I'm not going to vote on something that's not going to be in the best interest of the overall nation"? I mean, that's a tricky high wire act.
Actually, it's not. You know, people are so relieved that if they can have somebody they trust, even though they might disagree with the vote. We don't see that anymore. You see very few statesmen in Washington. You see a lot of good politicians, and they know how to play the game, and they know how to get reelected, and the powers of incumbency are massive. It's hard to defeat somebody that's there because of the financial differential in terms of fundraising. So what's happened really to our country is we don't elect congressmen anymore. Congressmen pick the district they want to represent through gerrymandering.
So would part of the solution be term limits?
Absolutely. That's part of this application that we've made. We have 12 states that have already passed this, Charles, and hopefully 10 or 12 will pass it again next year. We got to get to 34. When we do that, the Congress has to call an amendments convention, and there's no amendment that can be offered outside of the application that we've made, and that will then just be a recommendation back to the states. Do you really think the federal government ought to live within its means? You know, we hear the progressives talk all the time about people falling through the safety net. Well, nobody's thinking about the millennial generation, who the whole generation's going to fall through because we're not responsible with what we have done now. And so,
but isn't that the political third rail? I mean, you can't really address Social Security and Medicare. And at least there's never, obviously, been any political will to do the right thing. And because, to your point, I guess coming back, you may not be reelected.
You can, if you have the leadership. Reagan and Tip O'Neill fixed Social Security for 25 years. Now it needs to be fixed again. They didn't fix it permanently, but they did it. And they did it together. But that's because you had great leadership. And who cares if you get reelected? What about what happens in the future for our kids and our grandkids? Isn't that really more important than any politician getting reelected?
I agree 1,000%, and I think most of the audience does, and I think they keep thinking that's who they're getting every time they go on the ballot into their voting booth.
That isn't going to solve the problem. The reason I left Washington was I came to the realization we're not going to solve our major problems in Washington because the political class is never going to make the hard choices until we force them to. And here's the great news. You can actually do something about it as a citizen. You can start working on your state representative and your state senator and say, I want an amendments convention application made by our state. And then we can actually fix the real problem. Everything else is going to be treating symptoms, not the disease that Washington is today.
You've got several million people now involved in this.
That's right.
Give us the website again and walk us through it real quick one more time.
All right. The website is conventionofstates.com. You can sign up there. You can get all the information. It's easy. It's not hard to learn what this process is. Our founders gave it to us as a gift for us to actually take back our freedom and our liberty. There's 2.8 million volunteers now working with conventional.
2.8 million.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what we're hoping to do is grow that to 10 million, because when we have 10 million and we send 10 million emails, we can shut down any computer system in the country if, in fact, they're not going to respond to the citizens of the state. And I'm talking about the state legislature.
Dr. Tom Coburn, former senator from Oklahoma, 2005 to 2015. You look like you're in great shape. You could have stayed there if you wanted to. Instead, you gave us this amazing book, D.C. Monopoly, using Article 5 to restore freedom and stop runaway government. Sir, it has been an honor and a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
good
Charles.
luck with this. I agree with you 1,000%. America needs this, and I know America wants this. So thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you. God bless.
All right.
The question facing us and facing our fellow countrymen is a two-word question. Very simply, who decides? The American founders had a simple answer. We, the people, decide.